Good Shabbos. Today is a double Parsha. Chukkat Balak. More about that later in Kiddush. Balak is the king of Moab, and he fears Israel. He fears the people of Israel. He says, the Torah says he fears that they are Rav. That's one of the words he uses, mighty. It says, one of my teachers, Art Green, points out that Rav is one of the same words that Pharaoh uses also about the people of Israel. The same fear that Pharaoh had. So Balak works to get the prophet Balaam. Interesting, not an Israelite prophet, but a prophet. He works to get the prophet Balaam to come and curse the people. And Balaam blesses the people instead 3 times. It's a really intriguing story, a great one to imagine being told around a campfire. Great argument that the Torah comes about as kind of a set of oral stories that then get written down. Great story. Read it. But Balaam blesses the people 3 times instead of cursing. And one of the phrases, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkanotecha Yisrael. That's what Balaam says. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkanotecha Yisrael. How good are your tents, O Israel, and your dwelling places. How good are your tents, Jacob, and your dwelling places, O Israel. And by the way, the rabbis see the word tents to mean places of study, like Jacob dwelt in tents while Esau went out hunting. So tents are the yeshivas, and the dwelling places, that's mishkanot. The mishkan is the tabernacle, so mishkanot are your synagogues. How beautiful are your yeshivas and your synagogues. The beauty that Balaam saw was an ethical and moral beauty in particular, even more than an aesthetic one. But Art Green points out that this is a story about Israel among the nations. Israel among the nations. You have the Israelites. Pharaoh was afraid of them. Balak is afraid of them. Haman hated them. This is a story that continues throughout history and continues to this day. Fear of Israel has been long-standing, and denunciation of the people of Israel has been long-standing. In many people's minds, we have stood for many different things. Often in their minds, we've stood for evil things. I will point out, in case you haven't noticed, that whole entire Christian tradition that says we are somehow in league with the devil, blood libels. You know this story. But we do stand for things. We often stand for a different way of looking at things. Our very existence has challenged the assumptions of the majority around us, often severely. For churches that say there's only one way, well, there we are, going another way. For Islamic nations that say there's one perfect way, well, there we are, going a different way. Our very existence can be a problem for others, and they take it out on us. June 23rd, 24th, that night, is the anniversary of the Mortara kidnapping. Not too long ago. It was 1858. That was not too long ago. I'll explain. On the evening of June 23rd, June 24th, in Rome, which at the time was the Papal States, it was ruled directly by the Catholic Church, Edgardo Mortara, age 7, was kidnapped from his home, a Jewish family in Rome, living in the ghetto of Rome. Don't forget, the Roman Catholic Church never allowed the Jews out of the ghetto. They simply we were in the ghetto until they lost Rome. That was it, 1870. Edgardo Mortara, as an infant, got very sick. The Catholic maid secretly baptized him. Then he got better, and then she was plagued by guilt that now there's this Catholic child who's being raised by a Jewish family. According to Catholic law, it was an illegal baptism, but still effective. So when she confessed this to her priest, it became known to the church that there was this officially Catholic child being raised by Jewish parents. They kidnapped him from the family, never returned him, never. He was raised, kind of became like a stepchild of the Pope. He was raised as a Catholic priest, died as a Catholic priest in 1940. That's why I say it wasn't that long ago. We all know people who were living in 1940. So this is just 2 lifetimes ago, when that's how we were treated among the nations. In Europe, I will say that conflict, that scandal is part of what spurred the American Jewish organization to get itself organized. This is but one example of the fragility of Jewish life in the absence of self-determination, the absence of a voice on the international stage that comes with sovereign independence. Yes, in this case, I'm talking about the state of Israel. That at least having a state on the international scene gives us some type of voice, so that we're not treated like the Yazidis or the Kurds. Part of what is missing among all the words about Zionism and anti-Zionism in those discussions is any discussion of the pre-Zionist condition for Jews when we were defenseless in the face of other nations. That is part of the narrative that must be included. What was that pre-Zionist situation that we don't want to return to? The time before there was a state of Israel. We should recall as well that June 2nd was the anniversary of the Farhud, anti-Jewish riots in Baghdad, the beginning of the end of the Jewish community of Babylon that came into being in the 590s and 580s BCE and lasted until the 1950s. Jewish riots in Baghdad as a result of Arab prejudice and Nazi provocation. Both of these events, Mortara, the Farhud, are indicative of much more in Jewish history in terms of how we have been treated in the world, and they are largely forgotten, especially by Western Jews. So, reading in the second of the 2 parshas, part that we read today, Balak, we see this element about how Israel is seen among the nations. At the same time, we should remember the lessons at the beginning of this week's parsha, which are not immediately obvious. This week's parsha, Chukkat, the first of this week's parsha, Chukkat, speaks about the red heifer. Have you heard about that red heifer? That para aduma, that reddish, brownish cow, which is used, the red heifer is used for expiating tumat met. That has to be taken apart there. Tumat met, the tuma, not the impurity, but the obstacle to holiness. Tuma. You come into contact with the dead, you come into contact with other things too, but in this case, you come into contact with the dead, you're no longer qualified to engage in holiness. So you have to be in a state of purity to engage in holiness. Being in a state of purity is not in itself holy, but you have to be in the state of purity to sacrifice things in the temple. If you come in contact with the dead, then you're in a state of tuma, tameh. That has to be expiated somehow, gotten rid of. The only way to expiate tumat met, the tuma of coming into contact with the dead, is through some type of ceremony which involves being sprinkled also with the water mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. So this is the only way to get yourself prepared for the priests to get themselves prepared to offer sacrifices. Can't have all these animal sacrifices without that red heifer allowing people to become pure. And there's a lot that can be said about it, but one of the things I think that it says, the fact that it's there, is that we are supposed to be people about life, not about death. We're supposed to be people about life, not about death. Now, in this parsha, also, Chukkat, Miriam and Aaron both die. Miriam, Moses' sister. Aaron, Moses' brother. Moses loses a sister and a brother. Aaron was the progenitor of the priests. The priesthood would continue and still continues to this day, as you know. We have an inactive priesthood. The Kohanim, all the Kohanim, they are inactive priests. There are some roles that are still reserved for them, but for the most part, they are priests that it's an inactive priesthood. Miriam is described in Exodus as a prophetess. She's described as a prophetess right after we come through the sea, and she leads the women in dancing. And the passage in this parsha, when it says, Miriam died there and was buried there, and the people had no water. And it starts talking about the water of Meribah. There's a whole other really interesting story in there. Go read it. But the rabbis ask, why is it so abrupt like that? Miriam died there and was buried there, and the people had no water. Non sequitur. Midrash always works by rabbis finding a problem in the text, grammar or non sequitur, and like an oyster that's stimulated by a grain of sand, they spin pearls. So Midrash is the pearl. So the Midrash develops Miriam's well. There was this well. The people are always complaining about water. So there's this well that develops in connection with Miriam, a well for water. And wherever the people go, the well travels with them. Miriam's well travels with them, providing them with water, until she dies and the water disappears. So Miriam died there and was buried there, and now the people have no water. And the story continues about water and doesn't go so well. Read it. But water is life. Do need to say that. Water is considered life. Add water to arid desert soil and it blooms. That's the difference between a blooming land in the land of Israel and the desert. Water. Water is life. Torah is life. Torah is water. All those things get mixed up. Once more, though, Miriam represents life, water. The priests are supposed to be somehow separate from death. We emphasize life. Our life as a community should mirror Miriam's emphasis on sustaining life and Aaron's priestly emphasis on mediating away from the impact of death. These are important lessons for us to remember and act on as a community. The people of Israel and the nation of Israel should minimize its involvement in inflicting death, and the nations of the world need to remember that the conflicts our people become involved in stem from the long-standing way that others around us have demonized us, oppressed us, marginalized us, murdered us, and that makes it imperative that we have a nation of our own, and imperative that we continue to have a state of our own, because so many of those around us continue to demonize us. And somehow our very existence challenges them that much. That's not the end of the story. Because as a community, We should not be about tuma and death. We should be about sustaining life, especially when we have actual power in the world. Ironically, we have power in the world of the sort that our enemies often in the past accused us of having, but we never did. Our people never had as much power as we were accused of. And now we do have power. And that power must be utilized carefully and responsibly, so that we can be worthy of the blessing that Balaam gave us. Ma tovu oha lecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, and your dwelling places, Israel. But too much of our own community is forgetting that we have to be about that lesson of life. Too much of our community is forgetting this teaching of the red heifer is a living modern problem. It is a living modern problem. There are people among our people, especially congregated in Jerusalem, but they're not only in Jerusalem. They're in the West Bank. They're in New York. There are people in our community who want to rebuild the temple, who want to be on the Temple Mount, who are willing to start a war, really, if it means they can have the temple again. There is a yeshiva in Jerusalem for training Kohanim to be priests. And for there to be a temple, for there to be sacrifices again, there has to be an unblemished, absolutely purely reddish-brown cow. There has to be a red heifer so that the sacrifices can start. Now, for various reasons, there haven't been a lot of Jewish farmers and cattle raisers over the past 2,000 years, but there are also coalitions with evangelical Christians throughout the world in the United States, and there are ongoing efforts to breed this cow. And every once in a while, the story starts circulating that they think they have one. They think they have one. And that creates in Israel a national emergency, because someone's going to be motivated to go up and do something at the Dome of the Rock that's going to cause a war. Not everyone among our people remembers that we're supposed to be about life. And it becomes our own obligation to remind them. It really does. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionism, defined Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, and he often called for the reconstruction or reconstitution of the Jewish people. He called for the reconstitution of the Jewish people. That is big. That is ambitious. I hope you realize that Reconstructionism really is an ambitious agenda. In fact, it's so ambitious that I think the Reconstructionist movement has basically forgotten it. You don't hear much about what Kaplan was always talking about, especially near the end of his life, the reconstitution of the Jewish people. That somehow the Jewish people had to be reconstituted sociologically, socially, politically with a small p, as one people, not a collection of individuals. A collection of individuals that he said sometimes we were tired, scared of living and tired of dying. Is that it? Because there is this Broadway said, I'm tired of living and scared of dying. He said, that's not the Jewish people. The Jewish people is scared of living and tired of dying. He saw Zionism as one tool for accomplishing this reconstitution of the Jewish people. But not that the state of Israel would be the focal point of a reconstituted Jewish people. Not that the state of Israel would be the focal point. Rather, the state, in his view, would be a means, not an end in itself. The state of Israel would need to be a democratic state for all its citizens, Jewish and non-Jewish, and not all Jews would be living in Israel, for that matter. So the Jews of Israel would be part of the reconstituted Jewish people along with the Jews of the diaspora. Not all the people in Israel would be part of the Jewish people, and not all of the Jewish people would be part of Israel. Think of a Venn diagram. You have Israelis and Jews, and then you've got this overlap. And the Jewish people had to be reconstituted in a way so that it incorporated and took advantage of the strength of that large Jewish community in the land of Israel, but wasn't the same necessarily as the government, the state of Israel. And he wrote, his language was always plotty. The metamorphosis we Jews have to undergo involves the reconstruction of Jewish peoplehood, the reclamation of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the replenishment of Torah. Replenishment of Torah. He did not mean an orthodox view of Torah. He meant Torah as all of Jewish tradition and teaching, taking into account also the insights of modernity, the replenishment of Torah. Torah is a way of life anchored in our sense of peoplehood as a community, expressed through the practices and literature and artistic expression of our people, and dedicated to the highest prophetic ideas of our heritage. He would use that word, prophetic ideas. Dedicated to the highest prophetic ideas of our heritage. The return to the land of Israel, one of those three, is basic to our dignified existence in the world, basic to our self-determination and security, and basic to our ability and the freedom we need and deserve to express ourselves in our heritage in the midst of everyday life as a community. And the reconstitution of the Jewish people is a recognition among ourselves and the creation of social institutions to enable us to interact among ourselves and build a corporate identity that holds at its center the particular community of Jews living in the land of Israel because of its sociological weight, but not necessarily the state itself, which needs to be a democratic state that includes more than only Jews. And this is crucial to the continuity of Judaism, of Jewish life, the Jewish people, and the constructive teaching that is Torah. So, that was Kaplan's vision. There's two problems. One, the non-Jewish world around us, the Christian world and the Muslim world in particular, will be slow to accept that Jews have a right to constitute ourselves as a people in the classic biblical sense of an Am Yisrael. And the non-Jewish world around us will in many cases refuse to accept that Jews have a right to the sovereignty necessary for self-determination in the Middle East or any place else. You try to create a state any place else, they say, what connection do you have to those lands? You try to create a state in the Middle East because that's the one place we do have a connection. They say no, because one way or another you have been superseded. You don't have a right to that. In Islam, Jews are a dhimmi people. That is, we are a protected second-class status. Islam doesn't allow for Jews to be ruling in the Middle East or Jews to be ruling over Muslims. And Christianity traditionally sees Judaism as unnecessary anymore. It's been superseded by Christianity. And then the second problem, something he stated very clearly in an address that he gave to the Rabbinical Assembly, which is conservative, in 1954. He literally said to these rabbis in 1954, Jews who live in the diaspora are likely to act as a brake on the chauvinistic tendencies that the Israeli struggle for survival is only too apt to arouse in the Jews of Israel. Jews who live in the diaspora are likely, I think he meant likely, will need to act as a brake on the chauvinistic tendencies that the Israeli struggle for survival is only too apt to arouse in the Jews of Israel. He saw that people under constant attack are eventually going to become less and less and less generous. And that the Jews in particular of America were going to have to remind the Jews of Israel what we stand for. And it turns out not only Jews of Israel, but often Jews in the diaspora too, have become more chauvinistic as a result of this struggle for survival. We must hold both concerns and hold to both teachings. The Jewish people has a right to a presence and the sovereignty necessary for self-determination in the Middle East. Israel has a right to exist and to defend itself from those who want to destroy it and kill its citizens. And the Jews of Israel and around the world must be committed to the highest prophetic ideals of our tradition. We need to be active and loud and speaking out on both of those points simultaneously. Both of those points simultaneously, and I don't hear the Jewish community speaking out on either point, really. In the right way. I think this is where we have failed as an American Jewish community. And it's time we began to act differently. This July 2nd is the fast of Tammuz. I am coming to a conclusion. This July 2nd is the fast of Tammuz. That is 3 weeks before the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is the anniversary of the destruction of the temple. It represents everything that's broken in the world and in our lives, all the brokenness. You've heard this story. All our holidays are about, like, they tried to kill us. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. These 3 weeks of this, they tried to kill us. We weren't so lucky. It's about the brokenness, all brokenness in the world. And the fast of Av in the middle of July is a 25-hour fast. It mirrors Yom Kippur. 3 weeks before is a 12-hour fast, or sunrise to sunset, sunrise to dark fast. The fast of the 17th of Tammuz. Historically, it represents the time when the Babylonians breached the walls of Babylon 3 weeks before the destruction of the temple. So those 3 weeks become a time when we focus on those themes. But it's also 40 days after Shavuot. Shavuot, the Jewish people reach Sinai. Moses goes up eventually on the mountain. 40 days and 40 nights. That's around the 17th of Tammuz. Moses comes down. And what's happening? The golden calf. And Moses shatters the tablets. The rabbis compare the receiving of the Torah, the entering into a covenant between Israel and God, like a wedding. And the Torah is our ketubah. And the people were committing adultery on the wedding night. The covenant is shattered, it's broken. And that is the fast of Tammuz. Broken Torah. Entering into 3 weeks of brokenness. And there's a lot that's broken around the way we are responding or not responding to everything going on around Israel. We have two different teachings about this that we have to hold simultaneously and remind the Jewish people about and remind the world about. So let us, as we enter into the fast of Tammuz and the 3 weeks, let us contemplate how we can do better and begin to enter into our own obligation. Shabbat Shalom.